안녕하세요. 우리 친구들 잘 지냈어요? 오늘은 제가 어떤 책을 가지고 왔냐면요. 따란! 이 원숭이 친구 책 갖고 왔는데 이 원숭이 친구 이름이 뭐냐면 조지라고 해요. 근데 이거는 영어 책이 아니라 병원소동 한국 책인데 우리 예림이가 이 한국 책을 아빠랑 읽다가 너무너무 재밌어 하길래 똑같은 영어 책, 내용은 다르지만 캐릭터가 같은 조지 책 가져갔어요. 이 Curious George 책이 이만큼 있거든요. 그래서 이 시리즈를 한번 다뤄보려고 합니다. 그래서 이 책 같이 읽을 테니까 기대해 주세요. 자, 첫 책부터 시작할게요. The first book for today is Curious George. 너무너무 호기심이 많고 궁금한 George. Dream. 꿈이에요. George is sleeping in the bed. 자고 있는데, do you think he's dreaming? 지금 꿈을 꾸고 있을까요? Or just sleeping. 그냥 자고 있을까요? Let's have a look. 항상 이 책은 This is George라고 시작해요. Look at the picture. This is George. This is George. Do you know who he is? George was a good little monkey and always very curious. After a long day at the amusement park with his friend, this is George's friend, a man with a yellow hat. Do you see his yellow hats? He always wears a yellow hat. George was tired and glad to be home. 오, 파크 다녀왔더니 너무너무 힘들어요. 피곤해요. So he's tired. And he wants to rest. 따란! 이제 뭘 할까요? Soon dinner was ready. 저녁 식사 is ready. But when George sat down to eat, he was too small to reach his plate. Oh, look at the picture. 너무 작아서 플레이트에 손이 닿질 않아요. Oh, I'm sorry, George, the man said. I forgot to fix your chair. 이 체어를 더 높게 만들어줘야 되는데 maybe he forgot. 까먹었대요. So what did he put? He put a large book on George's chair. 여기에 큰 책 올려놓으면 어때요? And George climbed up. 올라가서 앉을 거예요. As he sat on the book that was sat on his chair, ta-da, do you see the book? George thought about his day. 오늘 하루가 어땠더라? All day long, he had been too small. 오늘 하루 나 너무 내가 작게 느껴졌어요. 무슨 일이 있었던 걸까? What happened to him? This is in his thinking, his imagination. Your hands are too little. 또 너무 손이 작아. To hold these baby bunnies. 이 베이비 버니 안기에는 the manager of the petting zoo told him. 맞아. 이 zookeeper가 조지한테도 너무 작아서 안 돼. 버니 못 잡아 했어요. I'm sorry, said the man operating the carousel. I cannot let you on. You need a grown-up to ride with you. 이것도 carousel도 못 한대요. We need a grown-up. 어른이 필요하대요. Maybe next year, said the man, taking tickets at the roller coaster. 롤러코스터도 작아서 못 한대요. 우리 친구들은 어때요? 우리 친구들 이런 거 탈 수 있어요? But after a good meal and a good dessert, George began to feel better. 밥 먹고 나니까 기분 좋아요. When the dishes were finished, the man said, George, I have a surprise for you. And they went into the living room. 밥 다 먹으니까 아저씨가 짜잔! Surprise! 놀랄만한 선물 있대요. The surprise was a movie. Surprise 뭐예요? It was a movie. Do you like to watch movies? 영화예요. George was glad to watch a movie. That was something he was not too small to do. 작아도 충분히 할 수 있어요, 영화 보는 거. George was enjoying the movie. movie 너무 재밌어요. But it had been a full day. And now he had a full stomach. 배도 너무 부르고 오늘 하루 종일 너무 바쁘고 힘들었어요. Soon he could not keep his eyes open. 눈을 못 뜨겠어요. The next thing George knew. 그 다음에 조지가 알았던 거는요. He was back at the petting zoo. 어떻게 다시 zoo로 돌아갔네요. 동물원으로. But this time something was different. 이번엔 뭔가 좀 다른데. The petting zoo was very small. Oh, everything is so small. He got so big. George looked around. 주변을 돌아봤는데 then he could look at himself. 조지 자신을 보니까 어때요? Maybe everything wasn't so small after all, he thought. Maybe he was. 주변이 작은 게 아니라 Ta-da! Look at him. What do you notice? Big. George got so big. Uh-oh, this is not right, thought George. Then he remembered the bunnies. 우리 아까 bunny 있었잖아요. 작아서 못 만져봤던 거. Why? He was not too small to hold the bunny now. 이제는 충분히 잡을 수 있겠어요. He was not too small to do anything. What fun, George thought, and he went to the bunny hutch. Now George could hold lots of bunnies and he cuddled them to his face. 우와, 이렇게 쬐끔해요. 이제 안아줄 수 있어요. The bunnies liked George. George looked so happy. But the manager of the petting zoo did not. Oh, he doesn't look happy. Put those bunnies down. 당장 내려놔, she said. You will scare them. 얘네가 널 무서워할 거야, she said. You will scare them. You're too big. 너무 크니까 버니들이 무서워할 것 같아요. George didn't want to scare the bunnies. 조지가 원했던 건 아닌데. He put them down and turned to go. 그래서 내려놓고 갔어요. Then George saw the roller coaster. 아까 못 탔던 거 있잖아요. He was curious. 궁금하다. Was it big enough to ride it now? 이제 탈 수 있을 만큼 커졌어요? Of course it was big enough. 물론이죠. If only he could find a seat big enough for him. 아주 큰 seat 있으면요. But the man taking tickets made George leave. 된대요, 안 된대요? 안 돼요. You cannot ride this ride, he said. You are too big. Why not? 왜 안 된대요? 너무 커서 안 된대요. George was sad he could not ride, but he did as he was told. 그래서 롤러코스터도 못 타고 나왔는데, oh no, what are the people doing? I think they are running away from George. Catch that monkey! 저 monkey를 잡아라! Someone yelled as George was leaving the roller coaster. He's dangerous. 너무 커서 위험해 보이나 봐. People in the park became frightened. 아이고 무서워라. They began to run. 달리기 시작했어요. They ran in all directions. 여기저기로 뿔뿔이 흩어져서 달려가요. But mostly they ran away from George. 그런데 대부분 조지로부터 멀리 도망가요. George felt awful. 너무 기분 안 좋아요. He didn't want to frighten anyone. 무섭게 할 건 아니었는데. He just wanted to hide. 숨고 싶어요. But where could he go? 너무 커서 갈 데가 없네요. He was too big to fit anywhere. 핏할 수 있는 데가 없어요. 맞는 데가 없어요. Then George saw the carousel. Remember, he couldn't ride it before without a grown-up. He wouldn't need a grown-up to get on with him this time. But this time, George wished he had a grown-up with him. 이번에도 어른이 같이 있으면 좋을 텐데. He wished his friend were here. Who's his friend? His friend is the man with the yellow hat. George sat on the carousel, feeling lonely. 너무 외로워요. Suddenly, someone called his name. George! George! It sounded like the man with the yellow hat. Could his friend be here to take him home? 아저씨가 왔나? George heard his name again. the man is here. It was his friend. George wanted to jump into his friend's arms, but the man with the yellow hat was too small. How could he ever take George home now? The man called his name again. 다시 한번 불렀어요. 근데 아저씨보다 훨씬 커서 어떻게 집에 데려가지? George, he said, wake up. 일어나. It's time for bed. 자러 가야지. You fell asleep watching the movie. 너 이렇게 무비 보다가 잠들면 어떡해? The end. 무비는 끝났어요. George looked at his friend. Why? He wasn't small after all. George looked at himself. He was not big. Now George could jump into his friend's arms, and that is what he did. 이제 너무 크지도 작지도 않아요. As the man with the yellow hat tucked him in, 이불을 덮어주고요. George was happy to be in his little bed. It was not very big, he thought. 너무 크지 않아요. But he fit in it perfectly. 완벽하게 딱 맞아요. George was just the right size. 너무 작지도 너무 크지도 않은 right size예요. So that was all about Curious George Dream. Thank you for listening.